The cramping did not arrive like hunger. It was something far more visceral, a localized pressure deep within me that felt like a fist slowly tightening. I was only 11 years old, sitting on a weathered wooden bench in a crowded one-room schoolhouse in Lancaster County, surrounded by 30 other children. As I shifted my weight during the arithmetic lesson, a sudden, unsettling warmth began to spread beneath me, warm, wet, and terrifyingly wrong. When I finally gathered the courage to look down at my light blue dress, the stain creeping across the fabric was not yellow, it was a deep, dark crimson. I had absolutely no idea what was happening to my body. Not a single person in my entire life had ever uttered a word about this possibility. Sitting on that bench, feeling the blood slowly soak through my layers of clothing, I was gripped by a paralyzing certainty. I believed with all my heart that God was killing me from the inside out, as punishment for my secret thoughts. In the silence of that classroom, while the chalk scraped against the board, my childhood ended, and a long, dark journey into a world of unspoken shame began. In the world where I was raised, the body was never truly your own. From the very moment of birth, your physical self belonged to God in the community, governed by the sacred principle of Gelassenheit, a total yielding of the individual will to a higher authority. While the English girls in the world outside our borders were taught about the mysteries of puberty through health classes, modern textbooks, and open conversations with their parents, my formal education ended abruptly at the 8th grade. Within our district, female biology was a topic shrouded in absolute mystery, omitted from our curriculum and avoided in our homes. To us, the body was seen strictly as a vessel for two purposes, labor and childbearing. It was something to be covered in plain fabric, controlled through rigid discipline, and never, ever named. I was one of 9 children growing up on a farm in Lancaster County, surrounded by sisters and aunts who had all walked this path before me, yet I was walking into the greatest transition of my life in total darkness. In our community, we let our daughters bleed in terror and called it modesty, choosing a tradition of silence over the safety of knowledge. The crushing weight of shame hit me long before I could find a name for my condition. In that small schoolhouse, privacy was a luxury we didn't possess. A classmate named Katie, who was 2 years older and had a talent for finding the vulnerabilities of others, noticed the dark mark on my wooden bench. She gasped, her eyes widening with a mixture of excitement and malice, and whispered loudly enough for the entire row to hear that I had wet myself. The snickers from the boys at the door felt like physical blows. I didn't know what a period was, nor did I know that women bled every month as a natural cycle of life. I fled from the classroom to the outhouse, slamming the heavy wooden door to hide in the half-darkness. In the suffocating air that smelled of lime and old wood, I searched my body for a wound, running my fingers along my skin, but there was no cut or scrape. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, convinced that this was divine retribution for a sinful paperback novel I had hidden under my mattress. To my 11-year-old mind, this wasn't biology, it was a death sentence. When my teacher, Miss Stoltzfus, finally knocked on the outhouse door, I opened it with a swollen face, a ruined dress, and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I whispered through my tears that I was bleeding, certain that I was dying right there in the dirt. Her expression shifted, not into a look of maternal comfort or gentle concern, but into a flicker of recognition, followed by a cold, sharp wave of irritation. At 19 and unmarried, she was as uncomfortable discussing the human body as she was discussing space travel. She didn't kneel down to hug me. She didn't offer a single word of reassurance to the terrified child standing before her. Instead, She reached into the supply closet with a flat, clinical detachment and pulled out a dark-colored cloth. She pressed it into my trembling hands and told me to put it in my undergarments before dismissing me entirely. "You're not dying," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Go home and tell your mother." That was the entirety of my formal education, a rough, dark rag and a command to leave. I walked the 2 miles home alone under the September sun, feeling the cloth bunch and shift, carrying a secret that felt heavier than the world itself. I walked into our kitchen, my breath hitching, as I stepped into a room heavy with the scent of hot vinegar, basil, and the thick steam of canning tomatoes. My mother stood with her back to me, lifting glass jars with rubber-tipped tongs, lost in the rhythmic labor of the harvest. I stood in the doorway, crying silently, my stained light blue dress catching the afternoon light. When she finally turned and saw me, she didn't rush to hold me or ask what had happened. Instead, she slowly closed her eyes in a silent prayer of resignation. I knew that face. It was the look of a woman who had known this day was coming for her 7 daughters, and had dreaded it enough to never prepare them for it. Without a single word of comfort, she took me upstairs to the privacy of the bedroom. She pulled clean clothes from her dresser, along with soft cotton rags that had been washed into neat white rectangles over many years. She showed me how to fold them and pin them into my undergarments with safety pins. Then, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded tightly in her lap, she delivered the only explanation I would receive for years. "This will happen every month now. It means you're becoming a woman and can carry babies. Keep yourself clean, wash the cloths in cold water, and don't talk about this with anyone." For the next 2 years, I lived in a cage of absolute silence. I managed my monthly cycles in total isolation, never knowing the convenience of modern products or the comfort of a shared conversation. Because those were considered English luxuries, I used the coarse cotton rags my mother had provided, washing them by hand in a small basin of cold water in the upstairs washroom. I hung them to dry, hidden carefully behind rows of regular laundry, terrified that my brothers or father might see them and discover my shame. I milked the cows and scrubbed the wooden floors while my body doubled over in pain, believing that to complain was a sin of vanity. Everything changed on a humid afternoon when I was 13. My oldest sister, Leah, found me sobbing behind the heavy hay bales in our barn. She sat beside me in the straw, smelling of wood smoke and baby milk, and for the first time in my life, someone spoke the truth. She explained that the bleeding was fertility, a sign of health, not a punishment from God for a hidden book. In 15 minutes, her honesty dissolved the terror I had carried for 700 days. I wasn't broken, I was simply growing. Years later, after leaving the community and the shunning that followed, I sat in a therapist's office as a grown woman. For the first time in 22 years, I heard words like menstrual cycle, ovulation, and reproductive health. As she showed me a simple diagram of female anatomy, I felt a wave of grief for the 11-year-old girl who had walked 2 miles home in a blood-stained dress. When I finished recounting the story of the schoolhouse, the dark rag, and the 2 years of silent shame, my therapist looked at me with a profound, quiet clarity. She said 5 words that finally unlocked a decade of hidden pain. That wasn't modesty, that was neglect. I share this story now as Rebecca, not to punish my mother, but to break a chain of silence that has stretched back through generations of Amish women. My mother was a victim of the same fear she passed to me, believing that a woman's body was a secret to be kept, rather than a life to be understood. If you grew up in a world that taught you to fear your own skin, Hear me now. You were never broken, and you were never being punished. Your body was never the sin. The silence was.